welcome to the CollectingCars.com podcast with Chris Harris and Edward Lovett.
Hello and welcome to another Collecting Cars podcast. It's a special one for me because, as you might have noticed, this is a chance for me and Edward to sit down and talk to people we want to talk to. And this one I wanted to do forever. Probably my personal motoring hero, Martin Brundle. And that is at Martin Brundle F1 for Instagram, and he is at mbrundlef1 on Twitter. But you probably already follow him on Twitter because he's a legend anyway. And we've got at Edward Lovett with me here. Martin, thank you so much for letting us come and sit with you.
My pleasure. I was really overwhelmed when you asked me to do it, actually. What did you DM'd me on Twitter, I think.
I did. I
even saw it.
I realised that there's probably only about 5 people that I really, really want to get in front of these microphones, and you're one of them. Because I think your transition from being a racing driver into a broadcaster is fascinating. The way that you've communicated the sport and the sense of speed and the dynamics of driving in the cars revolutionised, I think, the way we all watch F1 in the UK and wherever else you're broadcast. But I want to go back to the start, really, and ask you about your formative years and get the sense of your relationship with cars and motorsport, and then we can maybe get to your later career afterwards. But it's that early stuff that I'm not sure everyone knows about, because we think of you as being the F1 driver that flipped upside down in Melbourne, ran back to his car, then the Murray years and where you are now. But take us back to the beginning. When did you first drive a car?
I grew up at a garage. My parents' used car lot, basically. Our first car that my brother and I had, I was about 7. It was an Austin A35, a black one. It was a bit of a wrecker. We took it down to a local field just near our garage in West Lynn, near Kings Lynn in Norfolk. And we sometimes drive it down there ourselves, actually. But we blag a mechanic all day long, and in between servicing some cars or fixing something, eventually somebody would give in and take us down there. Went round and round around this field in a big oval. And that's how we learned it. My brother had to kneel on the seat while the mechanic did the pedals. I could do the pedals and everything, but I had to look through the steering wheel. And that was it. That's how it all started, and I just absolutely loved it. And then when I was 12, my best mate at school, Rusty, said, I want to try and do some racing at Pot Row on the old grass track stuff. And I said, I'd like to do that. So I found a Ford Anglia down the far end of the used car lot. We got a bigger garage by now. And took the windows out, took all the interior out, put the radiator in the rear window and used as many hoses and bits of metal as I could to reconnect it back to the engine, welded the diff up, obviously took all the glass out, and that was it. And then I went and told my dad that we needed to take that one out of stock. But it was kind of they're all rusty down.
So I don't want to age you. What year are we now?
So I was born in 1959, and so what am I by now? 12...
Early 70s.
Yeah, early 70s this is, yeah. I'd been going to Grand Prix. My uncle took me to Brands Hatch in the 1960s and Silverstone. So they were my earliest memories of...
First driver you saw that captivated you, that made you think, I want to be him one day.
My uncle Keith was very into Jackie Stewart. So every time he came round, and Jim Clark, of course. And I liked Jim Clark and... Jackie Stewart as well, but particularly Graham Hill, because I remember I used to see him on the Sports Personality of the Year doing a little sketch with Jackie. I thought it was funny, and it was so hard to see motorsport back in those days, wasn't it? And even through the 70s and 80s for that matter. So they're my earliest memories of motorsport and of driving. And I did the grass track for a while, and then I won one day in my Anglia, I won the grand final where they put the under 1500 cc's up against the over 1500 cc's. And I was going round with a checkered flag out the window, still really could barely see through the steering wheel, let alone over it. And a guy who I'd beaten in this grass track racing took umbrage at it and reversed around the track in his Zephyr 6 and wrote me off, basically. And then came after me with a crowbar in the paddock, because my dad used to drop us off. It dropped me off in the transit van in the morning we had what they call an ambulance thing that used to be where you just put the front wheels in and tow it along. I mean, it was a race. It was a banger racer, really. And I'd run the car for the day. Then Dad would come and pick me up. As Dad came to pick me up, having been at the garage all through Sunday flogging cars as he did, there's this guy coming at me with a crowbar. And I mean, honestly, I was about I was 15 at the time. I'd been doing this for a few years. And we decided to get out of there. So I fibbed about my age And when Speedworth Hot Rod Racing, Yarmouth, Ipswich, did one event at Wimbledon, and where else was Vauxhall Heath, wasn't it? And Great Yarmouth, all the short oval racing.
Short ovals on the loose.
Yeah, fantastic. Some of it, Ipswich and Yarmouth and Wisbech were hard surfacing. Wimbledon was on the rough, on the loose. Yeah.
Do you think that starting off on the loose gave you a sense of car control that might be missing for some youngsters now, because they start off with very sticky tyres on good asphalt? But like Nick Tandy's the same, isn't he? He started off in short ovals, and it must give you a sense of car control when a car starts to lose traction, lose grip.
I think in hot rod racing, because it's a no-contact sport and there might be 30 cars in a quarter-mile oval, you've really got to have great car control, be able to go around, spend 3 laps going around the outside of somebody, basically, and work your way through the pack. I thought it was great racing. I really love it. I used to save up for the kart magazine, let alone the kart. I never raced a kart. I never raced a Formula Ford 1600. No, I just didn't have that kind of money available to us, really. So the banger racing and it's upmarket banger racing, really, grass track racing was the best I could do. And the stock cars and the hot rods as well. You could buy an Escort and put a 1600 BDA in it or something, and and go racing. It was great.
So, how did you transition into proper white collar motorsport? You've gone from the more blue collar stuff. How did you emerge in the posher format?
Well, we had a Toyota dealership, and I remember going down, and you waited every Thursday morning, didn't you, for Autosport to come through the front door. I was going through it, and there was this advert in the back for the Samurai Toyota team, the truck that used to be a Ford of Great Britain rallycross truck in its day. It had this tuned up engine. It's an amazing thing. And the 2 Celica GTs of Wyn Percy and Wizzo Williams, bless him. We've just lost Wizzo, haven't we? And I just thought it was amazing. My dad loved it, and he did a bit of rallying. My mum did some autocross as well. And we went down to Brands Hatch to see these race, and Wyn and Wizzo drove me around the paddock. It was the cars that were the end of the season. And I stood on the outside of Paddock Hill Bend at 16, and they came through, and it frightened the life out of me. I'm like, Dad, I can't do this. Cannot do this. Anyway, we found a way. So we financed, we put on HP the truck as a breakdown truck for the Toyota dealership, and we financed the 2 Celicas as demonstrators. So all on HP, the lot. And we got away with that. So Dad rallycrossed one, and I raced the other in the British Touring Car Championship. I think we spent about $3,000 on the whole year, finished 5th or something overall and 3rd in class, stuck it on pole in my first. I had to get my licence first in some Super Saloon races. So that's how I got into circuit racing.
What year was that, do you think?
1977, exactly.
Okay. And was that production class? Was that?
Yeah, it was in the
2 classes, weren't there?
Yeah, I was in the under 1600s. Then there was the 1300s. Richard Longman and his minis, and that was when all the Capris and Rovers were out there. Gordon Spice, your dad.
Yeah. Your father would have been there, wouldn't he?
Yeah.
Was he?
Would have $3,000 got you the same in today's money? Got you a season in British
you
touring
look at
cars?
the cost of it now. $3,000 wouldn't get you one wheel rim. I wouldn't have thought. It's
A
terrifying.
bit of hospitality for the weekend, maybe.
So you've demonstrated you can pedal. At what point did you realise? I hope you did realise that you might be a bit quicker than the others. When did you think I've got this? Because there is a moment, isn't there, where you think I can do this a bit better than them.
Well, I remember standing in a queue for the telephone box in Alton Park, and I just stuck it on pole. And there was a guy going, because obviously no mobile phones in 1977, guy going, you never believe this. This teenage kid on pole position. And of course it was me. And I stood in the queue waiting for the telephone box to ring my mum and dad and tell them I'd stuck it on pole position. So I thought, that's nice. Somebody's talking about me. DC's trying to get
Coulthard, go away.
He's in town. He's in town. And he wants to know
He's sniffing for beer.
if I'm gonna make it or not.
He's looking for the podcast gossip.
Yeah, I'll switch that off. Can we? This doesn't edit, does it?
Oh, no, so we can edit, but just press the button in the top corner.
I need to send
mute
somebody
it.
else a message.
Answer
as well,
it. Answer it. It's all part of the podcast.
Yeah.
Before I started this, I should have just dropped somebody a message.
We'll just wait while Martin
wait.
communicates with Mr. David Coulthard, who's in town.
Has the microphone under his chin.
Message like, I'm busy at the moment, DC.
Is he ever not thirsty?
He's a good lad. He's the president of the British Racing Drivers Club, I'll have you know.
He's fantastic.
Is he on speed dial one?
He's the only person that approaches you in the ability to communicate the sport through words. I think he's done a great job.
Yeah, we travel together, me and DC. We room together actually quite a lot, which confuses a lot of people.
Terrifying thought.
And it's, as I used to do with Blundell actually, but like half the cost of the rooms, we just have a lot of fun. Really, just have a load. And that started when me and Blundell were on ITV, Marky, my blood brother, effectively, and we were talking to each other through the wall of a hotel room, chatting for ages and ages. And I think we'd both paid 1,200 quid for the room each. And I'm like, mate, why don't we just share a room, get a twin-bedded room? And everybody's totally suspicious. And they're like, but DC, you can afford your own room. Yes, correct.
Yeah, but it's
Martin,
not boarding
you can
school.
afford your
It's not
own
boarding
room.
school.
Yes, I can. But we just have such a laugh. Yeah. Anyway, there you go. I got the message away.
Where were we?
Wait, so you've just heard someone speak about you, the third person down a telephone. This
Right, yeah,
kid,
I'm in a
right?
queue at Ayrton Park.
So at that point, you must be thinking. I've asked you, when did you realise? Did you have a moment then when you thought, I can do this better than the others?
I don't think I raced for fun, and I was still a Toyota dealer, still selling Toyotas on the Monday or Tuesday as soon as I could get back from a Grand Prix when I first became a Formula One driver in 1984. So it was all a bit of a mystery to me. Some key things happened. I wrote a letter to Tom Walkinshaw when I was 19, and I said to him, I think I'm going to be a top racing driver. Will you please give me a chance? I want to drive in the BMW County Championship, your championship, at the Norfolk round at Snetterton. And he put me in the car. And I had an amazing dice with Frank Sittner and Andy Rouse. And then the next one was the Gunnar Nilsson trophy and your dad again, Peter Lover.
Yeah.
Peter Lover
Tom was my
also,
godfather.
Of course,
and I'll say to people listening now, go onto YouTube and type in the BMW County Championship. There is the most extraordinary video on there, which is introduced as if you're all knights of the realm.
Yeah.
And and he harketh from Wessex. And they've written it like it's Shakespeare. It's utterly bizarre.
It was done like a jousting sort of competition, and at Donington, I put it on pole and cleared off, and there was Hans Stuck, Alan Jones, and Nigel Mansell was in this championship, and all sorts of drivers, and I just disappeared. And overnight, it put me on the map. And Tom, I raced again then with Tom, pretty much until 1997 in the Nissan. So we started this in '79, and I raced with him through all those years, and that was it. Overnight, from writing one letter to a guy I'd never met, and he gave me this chance, and boom, that was it. I was away. Then Tom put me in the works Audi, and nobody ever believes me, but my teammate was Sir Sterling Moss. Sterling turned up at the first round. I think it was not Cadwell, Mallory Park, and he was really unhappy. He didn't want to drive this car, if the truth be known. But he was in it. We were Team BP. I remember first time I met him, we were getting changed in the gents' toilets.
That must be surreal.
In the BRDC bungalow they used to have at the entrance to Silverstone. And I thought it was a bit surreal. Sterling turned up, and they'd spelt his name incorrectly. They'd spelt his name as Pound Sterling on the side of the car. So he hit the rev limiter on that, understandably. And that was it. So BP then took me into Formula 3 eventually, and then I got fired out of that because they thought Calvin Fish would be a better guy because this kid was coming along called Ayrton Senna. And then I remember sitting in Dave Price's office one day, who ran me in '82 in Formula 3, because we had BP sponsorship on the Audi, and then with Les Thacker, that took me to this Formula 3 gig, and I was all right at that, but I seemed to suffer from a bit of pressure, and then all of a sudden I just took off, but still got fired at the end of the season. And Pricey was like, Marty son, I ain't got nothing for you, mate. I'm going to ring somebody you might have. And that was Eddie Jordan. So I went straight from there to Eddie Jordan's and stayed overnight at Silverstone. And we set off to fight Ayrton Senna with I just won the Grovewood Award for Commonwealth Driver of the Year, $5,000.
Sorry, Commonwealth Driver
Commonwealth
of the Year.
Driver of the Young Driver of the Year.
What an amazing statement.
Yeah, and so I gave Eddie the $5,000. I painted his best friend Sebastian Ballam's Toyota truck in our Toyota paint shop myself. And we had this Citroen Familial 7-seater estate on the forecourt we couldn't give away to anybody. We gave it to the team in the end. That became the crew bus, effectively. And we set off. I think we had $22,000 one way and another for the start of the season to fight Senna. And Eddie was brilliant at ducking and diving. We borrowed $10,000 off Tom when we had no ability ever to pay back. But he got his money back out of me later on with a lot of Jaguar victories. And it was great for me, of course, as well. And then we got all sorts of sponsors. Eddie blagged free rent at Silverstone for putting Silverstone on the side of the car. And we literally, if ever I went to the factory, I'd stop at Allied Irish Bank in Northampton and put 250 quid in or 500 quid or whatever I could muster up of my car sales commission for the week. And that's how we went racing.
The Eddie Jordan thing is fascinating. Having worked with him myself, he's a polarising figure. He's a Marmite figure when he presents on F1. But as a human being to hang around with, he is about the most engaging human being I've ever met in my life. Can you just confirm that?
He is a unique individual. There's no doubt about it. I do love Eddie, and he gave me a chance. And also, he was struggling at the time, so we did a lot for each other, which I'll never forget. And of course, I drove for him again in Formula One for my last season in Formula One. So all the time in the world for him. He is such a character. You can't keep him down, and he is. He's not Marmite with me. I just like the guy. And
not with people. People that seem to be consistent. People who know him and known him for a while
and
have been through something with him would want to go into battle with him.
Yeah.
But certainly the casual viewer often thinks, "Oh, not him again." But I regularly have to say, if you met him, you'd love him.
He's a great character, and he's done very well for himself. He starts whispering, doesn't he? And then, why are you whispering to me, Eddie? Just talk to me. But Eddie does you think there's something really dodgy going on, but it's not. He just whispers a lot.
So, your year battling Senna is well documented, but I suppose at the time you didn't realise the significance of that part of your life, did you? It was just another young kid you were battling who would go on to be one of the greats.
Yeah, I wish I remember talking to him at length, in the paddock at Cadwell, and I mean we had a bit of a stressful year because he thought the system was against him, the British system, as he would eventually. All the traits I saw in Formula 3, I saw in Formula 1 with Ayrton. Clearly gifted. Everybody assumed he would wipe the floor in the championship, and he did for the first 9 rounds, until I kind of hit rock bottom and came back at him. And, it elevated me into Formula 1 straight away the following year. He was going to Formula 1 anyway, wasn't he? But he was just had this extraordinary talent for knowing where the grip was. And, I always say he knew where the grip was before and during the corner, where the rest of us knew where the grip was during and after the corner. And I'll never forget at Silverstone, it was pouring with rain. And I got the better start, as I used to quite often do. I led down to Stowe when Stowe and Club were really good corners and really fast Stowe. And he went down the outside. It was absolutely tipping it down. And I thought he'd gone off. I thought, see you, wouldn't want to be out there, mate, as I'm jockeying my car through the apex of Stowe Corner. And then he did the karting line, as I believe it's known, because I'd never kart raced at the time, and I still haven't really, other than sort of corporate fun karts. And he came out in front of me. I'm like, how did he do that? And he knew where all that clag was, all the rubbish was on the outside of the track. And it was a long way round there. And anyway, a guy called Kiki Mansilla crashed, and they red flagged the race. So we had to regroup, and so it became a 2-part race. As we went round to regroup for the start, for the grid, I thought, I'm going to try Senna's line. Went down towards Stowe Corner, steaming in, down the outside, hit a puddle of water, went down the grass, skimmed the barrier, just kept it all together somehow. Frightened the life out of myself, got back on the grid. This time Senna beat me away, and he won the race. I finished second. I said to him on the podium, your line into Stowe in the second part of the race didn't work, did it? He went, I don't know, I didn't try, it was too wet. And the guy had just got this this incredible innate sense of, hadn't he, when those qualifying laps he used to do, and but he was genius, and we had a really good fight. He ended up he parked his car on my shoulder once. I remember at Snetterton, we came off Sear Corner, And I stayed left. I'm thinking, if you're going past me, mate, you're going I was on pole. If you're going past me, you're going the long way round. He decided not to go the long way round. He decided to come half on the grass, half down half the car on the grass, half the car on the track, the half a car's width I'd left him. The last I remember of him was seeing the rivets in the undertray of his Rolt. And as he landed, he kept his foot in and tried to T-bone me going into what is now called Brundle, ironically. And missed me. But it got a bit tense. It really did get tense. He had his licence endorsed a couple of times, and he felt. But we had a race at Silverstone where I was going for points. I might have won the championship in the end if I'd have gone for those. We had two races in one: the British Championship and the European Championship. But to get British points, you had to be on the British tyres, which are much slower. Yeah. And about half an hour to go, final practice and quali, I said to Eddie, let's go European. This is not doing, we're miles ahead of anybody else in the British one, but we're about 10th on the grid. What are we doing, floundering around down here? Senna's got us beaten anyway. Put the Yokohamas on, stuck it on pole. Senna flew off the track trying to stay with me in the race, and two things happened. One is I suddenly believed I could beat Ayrton Senna.
That's crucial, isn't it?
And the other thing that happened is he suddenly realised I could beat him. And that just turned the season around. And I then started winning race after race. He crashed, then he crashed some more, then we crashed together, and he finished second behind me. We had an intense duel at Donington one day. And that's how I ended up going into the last round, actually 1 point ahead of him.
So you then realise, you must at this point realise that F1 is your destiny. You can get there because you've proved yourself in F3. But it wasn't an easy journey straight into it, was it?
No, well, Ken Tyrrell had said he would give the top British driver in the Formula 3 Championship, because luckily for me back then, if you wanted to get to F1, you had to do British F3. Yeah. It was an easy portal, maybe F2 as well, but it was so much easier for us then. And I guess it's getting a bit of structure again these days. But that was going to be me, because the only race me and Senna didn't win between us was when he landed on my shoulder, basically, at Ayrton Park with a mad move. And that's on YouTube as well. So Ken gave me a test. I went in, sat in front of Ken. I said, I want to drive for you, Mr. Tyrrell. I've got £150,000 worth of sponsorship.
That's a lot of money back then.
Yeah, it was. I didn't have anything. Didn't have a pound. I just thought it's
good number.
I just thought it's what I ought to say, and I thought if I get into F1, I'll find it like we found it in F3 the year before. I'll find it somehow. And then he tested me at Silverstone. I went really fast, and it was just a beautiful, crispy. Those Silverstone November days when it's dry, cool, perfect, and I flew. And then we went to Rio, and he tested me again. And he loved it because I was on a set of qualifiers, and Derek Warwick, who was also there at the party last night, came up. We didn't have the podcast on. We were talking about the Rat Pack reunion dinner we have every December while we're all still breathing. Derek came up behind me on a set of qualifiers in the Works Renault, and I wouldn't yield. I just blocked him because I didn't want him getting in the way of my qualifying lap. Ken loved all that sort of thing. But he hadn't got any sponsors. So he called me to his office, which was not a short drive from Kings Lynn in Norfolk to Ockham back in those days. The M11 didn't exist, I don't think, did it? Anyway, it was a long way, 3.5 hours each way. I'll go down and see Ken. And I sat in his office, and he said, I haven't got any sponsorship. Okay, thank you. Sorry, that's not going to work then. He said, but I'm going to take you on anyway. And I remember so clearly, early 84, I'm thinking, I really wanted to climb over the ceiling. I was so excited. I said, thank you, it's very kind of you, thank you. He said, and I know you don't have £150,000, so actually I'm going to pay you he paid me £30,000, all up. That included all my expenses. So the only money I made that year, especially after I smashed myself to bits in Dallas, was we used to get access to a Lorenza Merc. And I made more money on the Mercedes that we all used to grab and go and get a load of Hugo Boss clothes for nothing when we drove over to get the Merc. And that was it. That's how it went on. So I was kind of flat broke by the time I smashed myself up.
So you mentioned that first year you had a big shunt.
Yeah, well, it started well, didn't it? I was fifth in the first race in Rio. That went down well. And that's when I got back and started selling cars. and realised I was actually now a racing Formula One driver. I wasn't a Toyota
Not a
dealer.
Toyota salesman.
Not a Toyota dealer anymore, a salesman. So then I finished second in Detroit. I mean, we had the nimble little Tyrrell, and then Ken was up to something with some ballast, but we actually got thrown out later on over a political thing about having an auxiliary fuel tank in the car, which was nonsense because we never even filled the actual fuel tank up. We had a little Cosworth DFV.
Yeah.
We needed nothing like a full tank of fuel, but somehow, because Ken wouldn't vote on some turbo stuff, we got thrown out. So I don't actually exist that year. If you look
so
at
it's all been deleted.
Yeah, I don't exist. So my second place in Detroit, I've got the trophy at home, and alongside that trophy in my cabinet in Norfolk are the 3 screws that put my foot back on my leg from the crash in Dallas. And Ken was trying to calm me down a bit, and I was so gung-ho, I really... And Senna was a bit sniffy because I'd had a better start to F1 than he had as well. And then, anyway, Ken got caught out. So I was actually in Harley Street Clinic or something like that. They were going to chop my foot off in America, and Sid Watkins stopped them doing that. That'd have been the end of it because we had clutch pedals back then, of course. And they dragged me home. And this guy found a way with all of his mates and sending pictures around the world to put my foot back on my leg, which literally was just held on by the tube of skin. And I got out of the car and tried to walk away because I didn't want to believe I'd broken anything, which didn't help the case either.
Just folded it over, did it?
Yeah.
Oh God.
So they did all that, and I'm coming round full of painkillers and feeling a bit sorry for myself. And a guy called Barry Gill. Do you remember Barry Gill? He used to be a famous commentator. Somehow I was in a private room in this clinic, got through, and I can't do a northern accent, but Barry wanted to know if I got any comments about Tyrrell being thrown out of the World Championship, and that's the first I heard of it. That was the beginning of that. So then I did the Donington Truck Grand Prix a bit later on crutches. I turned up with my leg in plaster on crutches. I nearly won that. Thank God I didn't. I didn't want to be the first British Truck Grand Prix winner. The brakes failed about.
So how
3
long
laps
did
in.
it take to recover from that accident?
In a way, I never recovered because I could never left foot brake.
Yeah.
And that became, when we went to paddle shift later on, left foot braking became essential, basically. And then, of course, we went to two pedal cars. So,
what was the articulation issue? You couldn't move your foot forward.
Yeah.
Is it basically?
It doesn't. I got sort of half the articulation, but I had no finesse in my left foot.
Yeah.
So I've always been a right foot braker, and it also hindered me a little. I couldn't jog, I couldn't run a long way, so I had to find different ways to stay fit with row machines, with cross trainers, and with sort of running in sand any way I could because the ankle was awful, and remains so today, of course. So that was, I never really got my career back on track after that. I was always sort of floundering around a bit, and then when I finally did in '92 at Benetton, up against this new kid, Michael Schumacher. And Flavio tells me once a year ever since then, because he fired me at the end of the year because he thought Patrese would bring them a load of information about the Williams active suspension. They were going active. We had no idea how good Michael Schumacher was. You did a brilliant job against him. We never should have fired you. I'm sorry.
Oh, thanks, Flav.
I finally got my chance in '92, again through Tom Walkinshaw and Ross Brawn, who had been driving that beautiful little 91 purple Jaguar, the XJR 14 with the year before, to really get my career where it needed to be. And then I floundered after that. So
the injury thing's fascinating because I think people that are interested in modern Formula One don't appreciate just how many injuries there were, even in your era. We look at the 50s and 60s and the awful deaths and the 70s as well. But the table of people you were with last night, you think of Blundell, Johnny Herbert, all of you suffered something life-altering, really.
We had that conversation just last night. And Derek Warwick said he never even broke a fingernail. He was a lucky one. But Johnny, of course, had the terrible crash in F3000, wasn't it? Yeah. Martin Donnelly was there.
My God, that picture.
Yeah, that awful picture. You know, most of us limp of my era because we were basically put at the front of the car to counterbalance the weight of the engine and gearbox.
Your ankles were in front of the axle line, some of them.
Way in front of it. And so actually all we had was, two plastic master cylinder reservoirs.
Did you think about that when you...
No.
You didn't even think about it?
I thought it was the height of safety, really. I was in a honeycomb Tyrrell that stopped somewhere about my elbow, didn't it? that 84 car.
Yeah.
I drove Senna's 94 MP44 recently.
That was a good piece. That was a great
in
piece.
Sao Paulo. I loved that. And that was considered a very safe car. Yet almost all of your upper body was out of the car. And you think, how do we ever survive any accident at any time?
But if you get into that Senna car today, how do you feel?
Well, first of all, it was beautifully analog.
Yeah.
So I loved it. And to drive Senna's car in his home city, it's not that particular car didn't never race there because the race was in Rio back in '94. But when that car was dominating, but it was an extraordinary experience, I must say. But you did feel quite exposed in the car. And I'm 5'8", 80 kilos. I could not have, if I'd have been a centimetre bigger in width or height, I would not. I don't know how I'd have driven it, if I'm honest. So tight.
So, to go back to the Formula One career, so you've survived a bad accident. You've got your limbs working again.
Yeah.
Where did you go from there?
I sort of 86. Ken never really had the money, so every car was just an evolution of the last year's chassis. Then we stuck the Renault Turbo on the back of it, which was an extraordinary experience, where you'd be out of a morning, free practice 2 with 850 horsepower, get out. The next time you got in that same car with the same weight on a set of qualifying tyres, good for 5 miles, 8Ks or something, you had 1,250 horsepower in the same car.
How bad was the fuel? I heard stories about the fuel that you guys had to use just being so bad that the guests weren't allowed in the garage when you were filling up and
it's
stuff.
full of toluene and horrible stuff. It wasn't a problem for the drivers. It was a problem for the guys who had to put the fuel tanks in. It was terrible stuff. And the cars just used to melt, basically, but they would close off all the waste gates, and you would literally, it's like, and because you couldn't fire the qualifiers up on the outlap, so you'd creep round looking in your mirrors for a Senna lap, for a Dayglow orange and white McLaren coming at you with a very bright yellow helmet in it, because nobody wanted to be the one who screwed up Senna's amazing pole lap. And so you'd creep round, not wanting to fire the tyres up. So you got cold brake, come into the pit straight, floor the throttle. And you imagine in Monaco, it was just like warp drive, Starship Enterprise, especially going up the hill into Casino Square. And of course, you get to the first corner and your brakes weren't really up to temperature. The front tyres were nowhere near temperature. But the rears would be really good. Traction would be amazing on these qualifiers. Mid-lap, it would all be working. Everything would be sensational. Front and rear, brakes are up. You're confident with the power. Towards the end of the lap, the rear tyres had completely shot to pieces. So now
they basically had a working life of half a lap or a quarter of a lap.
That's it, and that's why you had to cruise out, literally, roll out on the outlap. So it was insane, but it was also very. Don't you think that's just very F1?
I think it's very F1, but I think all too often now people that watch F1 view it with rose-tinted spectacles, and that era, the racing wasn't always that great. You were struggling so much just to hang on to the bloody machines. There wasn't much processing power left to race.
No, I completely agree with you. I say that to a lot of people today. If you look back in those days, often the front to back of the grid of those that qualified, remembering we had 39 cars in 1989, nearly twice as many as today, but it could be 10 seconds from the front to the back of the grid. And then there's the ones that didn't qualify behind that. And the unpredictability back in those days was all about unreliability. It wasn't about amazing racing. Of course, you can remember Senna v Mansell in Barcelona and all the other great moments. But I think the racing's closer and better today than it was back then. And and if you got to the end of a Grand Prix, I was talking to DC about this recently. If you got to the end of a Grand Prix, it was a very pleasant surprise. It really was. Back then, now it's sort of almost a given, isn't it? If what's Hamilton just had? Without one incident, he'd had 67 consecutive point-scoring races or something. I mean, extraordinary now.
When you talk about the tyres and going out on those outlaps, how would that be today?
Well, I think to an extent, you still see them doing similar things of bringing the tyres in. It's a bit of voodoo, isn't it? I mean, how rubber reacts with the tarmac.
They almost have too much information, don't they? You see them when they have their burnout strategy on the line because they know it switches on the third one.
And the cars are amazing. So whereas, if we arrived at the apex pointing in the right direction in the right gear, that was a sort of a start on that corner. Now, if they brake a metre too early, they've kind of blown it, you know.
Yeah, you guys can always stuff that lap up.
So I don't think there's any less talent or skill. In fact, I'm absolutely sure there's not any less of anything. They're not going to die like we were probably going to die, but their skill has now moved away from just manhandling a car and surviving a lap, surviving a Grand Prix or what have you, to now driving with such incredible precision. Now, is that exciting? Not always, but I do think this year just gone, I've enjoyed as much as many a year in Formula One, I must say.
Yeah, I agree.
Certainly the best hybrid year we've had, which is a bit of a backhanded compliment, isn't it? But it's young guns, isn't it? Trying to knock the establishment off their pedestals and with amazing racing cars. So it is. I think I've really enjoyed this year.
So you're in F1, sports cars. When do sports cars happen for you? Because people don't know, apart from the specialists, know how successful you were in sports cars and how big a part of your career it was.
Oh, it's massive, really, and I should have stayed in it and done more of it, but I always went back to F1, which upset Tom because he wanted me to stay in sports cars. And again, it's Tom Walkinshaw. He got the Jaguar deal. I remember going to Snetterton, 1985, the green car, number 51, just with Castrol on it. Yeah. We raced at Mosport. I led in Mosport for a while until Porsche got bored with that and turned the boost up, and I think Ix and Bell came past me. But this is a beautiful little car made out of carbon, and that was the beginning of the Group C era for Jaguar, of which I was a fundamental part of for a long time.
How many wins?
I had 14 wins in sports car racing, 27 podiums, I think, something like that, a World Championship, Daytona 24 hours, Le Mans 24 hours, and a lot of the great sports car races, the Fuji 1000K, Spa, Silverstone a couple of times, Brands Hatch 1000, Nürburgring. I loved those races. I loved the way you could settle in. And my son's exactly the same now. He's an outstanding endurance racer because you can get behind the wheel for 2.5 hours and you just get into such a beautiful rhythm. You become one with the car and the track, and you dial into everything. I really probably should have just done sports car racing. It seemed to suit my driving style better.
The one book I want to commission, I couldn't write it, is the great Tom Walkinshaw. I won't say cheats, but the great Tom Walkinshaw rule interpretations. Are you willing to give us one?
Tom, like all of them, would read the regulations once to see what they said, and another time to see how to get around them. He was inventive, there's no doubt about it. I'm not sure as a driver you knew much about them, frankly, because you were just driving the car. You didn't. If there was a bit of skullduggery going on, the last person you're going to tell is the driver. I think there might have been some fuel churns getting swapped around between dump churns getting swapped around between fast and slow cars at Le Mans. That would be the only one I did hear about some years later.
Whilst I remember, you spoke at Tom's funeral, and the thing I remember the most is you were talking about the Bathurst race, and you asked Tom what line to take, and he said something along the lines of, "When the cat wags its tail, just follow." Yeah,
it wasn't Bathurst because I never did that. I'd like that. That's on my to-do list, Bathurst.
Okay,
which I better hurry up, hadn't I? We would have been in the European Touring Car Championship, which I loved that XJS. What a magnificent beast that was to drive.
Yeah. 7 litres, wasn't it?
Yeah, you just sort of guided that, and it did all sorts of things. You learned to ignore 70% of its quirky nature, and then every so often you're like, I need to sort that one out, and you really learn to drive. I loved that car. No, it was one of those European Touring Car Championships, and Tom was a quick driver. He always had the best tyres, the best car, but wouldn't you if it was your own team?
Yeah.
And he's like, "Yep, when the pussycat wags its tail, we're off." Yeah. And that was a rolling start thing. So. And he tried to get me to do the Nürburgring one day, and the Nordschleife, which I've just finally learned this year just passed. And I said, I don't know the track, Tom. I'm fed up with my drivers. I want you out there. The plane's on its way. I'm like, but I don't know the track, Tom. I'll teach you. You follow me round. I now realise, of course, now I do know the track. I would have died. There's no doubt about it. But just follow me. I'll teach the track. So halfway through this event, I'm standing in the pit lane at the Nordschleife, shaking like a leaf, really, in my Jaguar overalls, lid on, ready to go. Tom pulls in, duly, with that sort of grisly sort of grin on his face, sits there ticking over, waiting for the other car to come in, and I'm now about to follow him. I know the first corner's a left-hander because I can see it, and I have no idea. I had no idea. There was no PlayStation back in those days to learn it. What happened after that? And I was going to follow him around in that monstrous V12 thing and learn the Nordschleife. And Enzo Calderari was coming in the other car. I was about to jump in, and he crashed it on the way in. I never got in the car.
How much did you pay him to shunt?
Yeah. No, I think that was a lucky escape, actually. I now realise.
Let me just jump forward a bit. So I want to just talk to you about your transition from being a racer to a commentator, because psychologically that must have been difficult for you, because I got the feeling that your racing instincts were still there and you still wanted to race cars, but you realised that was the right time to transition away from driving to being a broadcaster. And but you were overnight successful, and you won awards straight away for what you were doing.
It's funny, isn't it? I think, I carried on racing because I was completely lost. I thought I was driving for Eddie in 1997. And Lou Goodman, who ended up working with the ITV the following year as well, came up to me at the racing car, what I like to call the racing car show at Birmingham, and said, "How much longer are you here for?" I said, "Why, another hour or so? Why? Do you need me to do something?" He said, "No, Eddie's about to announce Giancarlo Fisichella and Ralf Schumacher as his drivers for 97. And that's how I found out I was no longer a Grand Prix driver. It hurt. So I went into the commentary box kicking and screaming. I carried on racing because I drove for Nissan at Le Mans 97.
Yeah.
Toyota in that GT1, that lovely red GT1 car, 98, 99. Bentley in 2000.
Yeah.
Would have been in
God,
that.
I forgot about that. You were in that Bentley as well.
Yeah, the first year of the Bentley. And I did all sorts of things. I started managing David Coulthard. I started doing the telly. I was involved. I was on the board at Silverstone. I became chairman of Silverstone eventually.
But was all this distraction to try and...
I was just floundering around because I wasn't floundering. I just needed to fill my time.
Yeah.
And all those competitive juices needed to go. So all that adrenaline
has to go somewhere, doesn't it?
That you become. Yeah. And so I sort of went into the commentary box kicking and screaming. And I'll never forget the first race in Melbourne, 97, when they're, all forming up on the grid. And I just had this awful shouting feeling inside me of, stop, I'm not ready. You can't go yet. I'm not there. You can't go without me. And then we took off. And then the day after the race, I started getting these nice comments through. And I was working with the great Murray Walker. And, as I often say to people, having Murray, learning how to commentate on a motor race with Murray Walker is like having Pele teach you how to kick a ball, as far as I'm concerned. So it was wonderful experience. And I began to, I think it's my car selling experience that helped me. I'm a communicator. Although I was very shy at school, and I'm fundamentally a shy person, but you learn to read people when they walk in, because I had this philosophy: if somebody's coming on your forecourt or into your showroom, they're going to buy a car. They've made their mind up. They don't do it just for a laugh. They're going to buy a car. They might as well buy it from you. And that's why I sold quite a lot of cars. And I think you learn to read people quite quickly. You learn to communicate. You learn to keep it simple to an extent. Not overcomplicate things. But I had dinner with Murray Walker. I'd already said to Steve Ryder, "Look, I'm doing this telly thing. Where do I go and learn some basics?" And Steve said to me, "If you ever find anywhere, let us know." Which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah. So I had dinner with Murray on the eve of the championship, and I said, "What do I need to know, Murray, about this TV lark?" And he said, "I can't tell you anything about Formula One, Martin." I said, "Come on, yes you can, Murray. You've been around forever, and it's about telly anyway." And he said, "I'll just say one thing, and one thing only to you. Remember, we're here to inform and entertain, nothing more." And I thought, I remember that to this day, every time I'm in the commentary box, because it's absolutely right. It's not about you. It's not about it. All it is just explaining what's happening in the race. Don't talk down to people. People know their business. People, if they're interested in the sport and they're giving up a chunk of their Sunday afternoon to watch it, you better be adding some information and some entertainment and some knowledge pretty damn quickly, because they want to know more about what's going on. And at the same time, you don't want to overcomplicate, because you've always got this transition of new.
Who are you talking to? Are
viewers.
you talking to a specialist, or are you talking to someone, a lay person? I find that quite interesting sometimes, the way you position it, because you need to be able to translate it for the less knowledgeable, but not patronise the more knowledgeable. It's difficult, isn't it?
It is, in a way, yeah. So you couch it. What I try, you'll hear me say occasionally, look, I know a lot of you know this,
Yeah.
but for those of you who are new to Formula One, welcome. And, if it's a dry race, they need to use both of these compound tyres. They've got different colours on them. And I think you have got a transient audience, a refreshed audience. And I'll never forget watching Super Bowl once, which I didn't, whereas rugby looks like a fight, a big fight over a ball, American football looked like a big fight over a missing ball. I just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
And then I saw this sort of idiot's guide on Channel 4 to American football, and then I enjoyed it so much. So I think you do need to let people know what they're watching and why in bite-sized pieces. And also, I think, and you'll know this on Top Gear, humour is a wonderful communication tool, isn't it? People remember one-liners.
And so, do you prepare your one-liners? Have you got anything in your back pocket, or are they off the cuff?
I've never taken a note into a commentary box.
Well, that shows some skills there. You've said some top ones. It has to be said.
Do you know you said who am I talking to? I'm talking to myself. I just amuse myself. And if people are tuned into your sense of humour, great. And if they're enjoying, if you're adding value to them watching Formula One, great. And there'll be people who can't stand your voice, don't like your sense of humour, don't like that. You're bound to get that. I mean, remember, we go out to 68 countries around the world. We talk to a lot of people around the world. It's not just the UK. But back in the day, I mean, BBC, we used to have like 9 million viewers on the peak races. ITV was 6 million. Now it's a couple of million. Plus, but a lot more stuff on the digital platforms as well. But everything's diluted, because back in those days it was 22 million people watching Coronation Street, and that's now sub 10, isn't it, or something?
Oh yeah.
So but back then we didn't have Google, YouTube. It didn't have any of that. It didn't have 400 satellite channels to choose from. So it's changed massively. But I don't think Murray Walker's advice has changed its relevance at all, personally.
No, it's interesting. And this is a tough question. How do you feel as a driver? I know you're a deeply competitive human being, but you're probably better known now as a broadcaster than you were as a driver, and you might be remembered more as a broadcaster than a driver. Does that smart, or are you proud of your achievements as a broadcaster?
I've been lucky enough, Chris, to have 2 careers in Formula One, and it might be another one yet, who knows? But I can't complain, can I? I had 150 odd, so 160 something starts, and I survived to tell the tale. I stood on the podium 10 times. I learned a lot, and why would I complain? No, it looks like my racing career was a fact-finding mission for my broadcasting career in many respects. So take it as it comes. In a sports car, I was invincible from time to time, and I was outstanding. In a Formula One car, I was not. I was good, but I wasn't great. And that's what actually hurts me, as I underperformed and when I look back, and when I spent some years on the TV, and I think I managed DC for 11 years as well, and being involved in the teams, I saw a load of things. I thought,
if I'd known that,
why didn't I do it like that?
Yeah.
I had the talent. The dodgy left ankle didn't help for the left foot braking, but I didn't apply. I didn't focus hard enough. So the only thing that hurts me is I underperformed my ability in a Formula One car. Was I Senna or people like that? Absolutely not. They're once in a generation. We've got 2 at the moment, actually, as it happens, Leclerc and Verstappen. But they have a gift that's beyond. You can labour, you can get there somehow, but I didn't have their talent. But in a sports car, I could beat anybody.
Let's move on to street cars and motorcycles as well, because one thing that's always attracted me to your broader output in the media is that a lot of racing drivers don't like road cars. They're not interested at all. It's quite disappointing, isn't it? When you meet a racing driver, you don't want to talk to them about a road car, and they don't give a monkeys. They just want to get something cheap to get them home again. But you've always liked cars, haven't you? And motorcycles.
I love cars. Yeah, I drive. I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. And without naming names, there are some F1 boys who don't drive. I mean, Barry Sheen never rode a bike, did he?
No.
Hardly either. I love cars. I have since I grew up. I walk out of my back door in West Lynn into the used car lot, and I think obviously, and then into the workshop and work with the guys for the day or something. So I do. I cannot wait. I spec things up. I'll spend hours on a configurator specking something up I probably never get. But
what's the most fun road car you've ever owned? The one that you wish you'd never sold?
I had a beautiful Eagle E-Type.
Oh yes, yeah, I remember that.
Absolute stunner. But I picked up some tinnitus, and it sort of rattled my ear a little bit. But I sold that to a good mate of mine, and he still got it. Elvis, it's called. I might buy it back if he ever wants to sell it. A car that stands out for me would be a Ferrari 355 manual Berlinetta.
Yeah.
Don't like the floppy ones with the soft tops or whatever.
No.
That was a great car. I had a 550 Maranello. I love my DBS that I've got at the moment, which I think is probably the best car I've ever had, the DBS.
It's an animal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just perfect.
It's a great GT car when you want to relax, and then it's got 700 and God knows what. It'll light them up in fourth, won't it?
Yeah, everybody wants to race it on the road, and they see this beautiful Aston Martin, but I'm 60 years old. I can turn up in an Aston Martin. I can't turn up in a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, and I'm extremely happy in my scintilla silver DBS.
What about motorcycles? Because you came to motorcycles late, but I can remember coming back from Spa in an SLS, having done some junket with Mercedes-Benz, and I'm doing a $120 down the outside lane, and this BMW motorcycles just chopped me up the inside, and it was him.
Well, I did a great trip this year, Spa to Monza, and then I nearly rode home in one day from Monza. I got a big K1600, a six-cylinder BMW, which is just too big for me. Once it's rolling, it's great. When it's not rolling, with my height and size, I can only just keep hold of it. But it's an amazing bit of kit, and I do love. I remember coming out of the commentary box one night in Nürburgring, and I rode home to Norfolk, 500 miles, Germany, Belgium, France, into the UK. And I got this sort of adventure spirit. I read all the stuff in the bike mags about the adventurers. I love I'm desperate to do some of that. And I thought, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to Scotland. I'm going to go to Scotland. And thankfully I didn't, because I was battered the next morning. But that was after, literally, I finished commentating on the F1 and rode to Norfolk 500 miles. And I find the solitude, I love it. It reminds me of being in a racing car. You're looking through the letterbox of a crash helmet. You've got to read the road at all times, otherwise you'll be off. And there's something visceral about it. So biking, I'm really into. I love the freedom of it. But my cars. It goes back, I think, to. I always had a demonstrator car, and everything's when you've got car dealerships, as you know. Everything is for sale at all times. Mum would come down. She used to do the accounts at the garage. Like, I can't find my car, dear. Oh, Mum, sorry. Yeah, we sold that. We did take your stuff out of it, but we had a buyer on that, and it's gone. And then you try and find anything that got a bit of tacks in the window, maybe. And if the needle moved anywhere near into the sort of empty zone, it had enough to get her home and back. And then we put a new demo. I'd have a new car every 6 weeks or something, because he wanted to sell your demos and get them out the door. So I got into, and racing cars are the same. There's nothing more ugly than last year's racing car.
Yeah.
Next year's racing car is going to have more power, better suspension, more downforce. It's always looking forward. And I think I'm a bit the same I am the same on the road car.
Did you buy any of your racing cars?
I did. I bought the first Group C Jaguar, and it sat in my garage in Norfolk, decaying. And I sold it to Henry Pearman at Eagle.
Because he needed more, didn't he?
He needed some more Group Cs. I wish I'd have kept it, but I just looked at it and I thought, what am I going to do with that? It's just,
we might have found you a buyer, Henry.
It needs to move. The car needed to move.
Yeah.
I've had a few bits and pieces, but I think, and I've got loads of mates in that business, loads of mates, and I've just watched them sell cars to other people I know that have, bought £1 million car and it's now worth 10 or something, and think, why didn't you do that, Martin? But I think it's that mentality of next year's racing car or the next demo or whatever. So I've got my eye out at the moment for a DB4 or a DB5. I've really got the hot.
A street car or a racing car?
Good question.
Why don't we see you at Goodwood? Why don't we see you at places like that?
I used to race there a lot, didn't I? I mean, one of the greatest privileges of my life was racing Nick Mason's 250 GTO in the TT at Goodwood. I mean, talk about a challenge, talk about a responsibility. I think I described it as like having a Picasso under your arm at 150 miles an hour. I mean, it got about the same value, hadn't it? And you're on opposite lock through Ford water in the rain in a $50 million car. And Nick was like, I prefer you didn't roll it over, but have a go. Knock it about a bit if you want. I guess which I find. I think today they've started get some replicas of some of those cars, haven't they? But
no comment. But would you go back there? It'd be great to see you.
Yeah, I should go back. I mean, I was in Ray Davis's Austin A35. Which of course reminded me from back when I was 7 years old, when we had that black one we used to go around the field in. What a great little car that was. So. I'm probably due to go back to Goodwood. The problem is the F1 season is now, we used to be finished by mid-October, 15 or 16 races, probably 10 of which were in Europe. Now we're into next year's a 22 race season.
It's crazy.
Our last race this season, just gone, was December the 1st. The first time there'd been a Grand Prix in December since 1963 or something. So the F1 year has sort of dominates now, and they're all long hauls. If you look at the last 7, you're flicking around, so you're not looking for other. And I did 3 races at the Nordschleife this year as well, and I like to go and watch my son race. Yeah, and get out on the motorbike, and I've not been in a helicopter lately, and all the things I want to do for myself. I'm not looking to fill in the missing weekends.
No. Well, so F1, how much longer would you like to carry on in your current role?
Oh, I don't know. I think I fully expected to get booted out, to be honest.
I hate to point out that you're the best at it, so there's no one better than you.
I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. It's not for me to say. And there's so many now, so many people doing it. I kind of expected a Jensen or a Nico or a DC or whatever to come along and blow my doors off on it, because they've got, they're a lot better looking. They're much more relevant. They're much more recent, as it were. But I think broadcasting is a separate skill altogether, and I think they are all. I just mentioned they're all great broadcasters. I think they tell a really good story in F1. But at some point, somebody's going to come along and you know what? I think we've heard enough of Brundle's one-liners. I think we need somebody fresh now.
How old was Murray for his last commentary?
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? Yeah, Murray never started a race of any sort that I'm aware of.
He was good on a bike, though, wasn't he, Murray?
Yeah,
very good motorcycle racer.
He was. He was. I'm not sure he ever started a car race.
No, I don't think he did.
Aware of. So, and he had all and retains all the cred in the world, didn't he, Murray? So.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say to people listening: if you want to know more about Murray, go onto the BBC podcast archive and listen to Murray's Desert Island Disc. It's a lovely listen. It's a really good listen about. Yeah. He speaks about his father and he chokes up. Yeah. 20 years after his death. Yeah. It's a really lovely listen. That
he's sharp as a pin as well. Murray is. I saw him at a dinner recently in his honour at the RAC Club. He sat next to Bernie. I sat opposite them. That was a fascinating conversation, and him talking to Bernie and Murray at the same time. But he's physically struggles a bit these days, Murray. But he's really sharp as a tack.
He's a lovely man, isn't he?
A magnificent man, and people love him still. And they want him to be Sir Murray Walker and all that sort of thing, and rightly so. So. I don't know the answer to your question. I think the game's changing a bit. It's a long season, and I've been on this hamster wheel, this Formula One sort of merry-go-round 36 years now or something. Is it as long as that? Yeah. 90? Well, I sort of was started in 83. I was hanging around it. Yeah. So,
do you become conditioned? Do you become addicted to it, do you think?
When I walk into the paddock in Melbourne every year, my shoulders drop, I relax, and it feels like home, second home anyway. I'm like, I'm back where I belong, in the paddock of Formula One. So I know everybody, I know which way's up, haven't made too many enemies in the business, which is nice. I've got no skeletons in the cupboard. I'll tell it the way it is, which I think people expect me to do. Ruffles a few feathers. I get a few sideways glances from drivers who get sniffy with me.
So interrupt there. What do you think is the thing that's upset the apple cart most that you've done? What's the most controversial thing you've done that's generated a response from either a driver or a team principal?
Well, funny enough, the guy the guy who probably had to go at me most was David Coulthard's dad, Duncan. He was upset because family and friends pick up any negative, they pick it up. You can say 1,000 positive things about a driver, and I did about somebody like Michael Schumacher. He didn't talk to me for 5 years because something I'd said, because I think he was out of order when he was running people, which he did to me twice as teammates. When Michael was running people off the road,
yeah,
I thought it was out of order. Something I said got translated and put into a German newspaper, and he was so upset with it. He didn't talk to me for 5 years. No, the irony about Duncan poking me in the chest and thinking I wasn't being upbeat enough about DC is I was DC's manager at the time. But I think I used to overcompensate a bit so that I wasn't seen to be biased in his favour. I was probably I probably should have given him a bit more credit. But you've got to. People won't give you a second. If they think you're BSing, if they think you're not telling it the way it is, then you've lost your cred overnight. There's nothing, you can't do that. You've got, even if people don't agree with what your point of view, as long as you're telling it the way you see it. And what you've got to remember is, I don't have any VAR or like they have in football. We call whoever we're working with up in the comm box, we call it there and then live.
Yeah.
We don't have the data, we don't have the revs, we don't have the pedal positions or the steering angle or whatever. And you've got to call some of these incidents. So you go on your instincts, and you're not always going to get it right. Of course you're not.
So before we wrap up, because we've gone for hours and you've got to get off and see people and serve, Lewis, what's your thoughts on Lewis, the way he's emerged, the way that he's maintained his career, and what his legacy will be?
Well, as always, I think with great sportsmen and women and movie stars, I don't know, maybe musicians, they don't seem to be appreciated until they stop or they're gone. What impresses me is he's still got the mental and physical condition, agility, the need. Now, he's got enough cash in the bank. Does he need to do any of this? Of course he doesn't need to. He just wants to. And he's just relentless. He just keeps delivering. He is he's total box office, more box office for Formula One than all of the other drivers put together,
Do you think he has as greater effect on the sport as Rossi does on a MotoGP?
Yes. Yeah, without doubt. And I think you have to go back to the real characters of the 60s and 70s, or maybe even the 50s as well, where they were household names, weren't they? Because it was such a pioneering business back then. So, Lewis's talent is just outstanding. When he's moaning and groaning on the radio a bit sometimes, you think, why do you do that? You don't need to do that. Everybody thinks you're amazing anyway. You don't need to couch anything. But as I always often say, you can't just cherry pick the bits you like of great people like Lewis Hamilton. They come as a package. Nigel Mansell would be another good example of that, wouldn't it? Our Nige. They are what makes them who they are and what they achieve is the whole of their personality. So that is Lewis. That's how he performs, and he'll be 35 in January, and they still can't really beat him over a season. He's outstanding.
Do you think over a lap, Verstappen and Leclerc are probably quicker? Or do you think,
I think
Lewis
now,
has still got them?
I think now, Lewis tops the pole table, doesn't he, at 88, off the top of my head. So, right now, this would be something that would annoy Lewis a lot, but in a way, if you're looking forward, and these teams do look a long way forward, and I think that's probably why Lewis is scouting around and seeing what the options are, moving forward, you've got to think, your 21 and your 22-year-olds like Leclerc and Verstappen, they're the ones you've got to have in harness for the next 5 years.
Yeah. What about Vettel's season? As a sort of post-blown diffuser, I find his career completely baffling. I really do. It's extraordinary, really.
Yeah. I know how hard F1 is. So to turn up, I think he had a 25% winning rate and a 50% hit rate on podiums, and he's a 4-time world champion. That's a good driver. It's a great racing driver.
Stunning.
Right place, right time. Well, you could say that about Lewis. The best drivers end up in the best cars. The cream rises to the top. So you can't take anything away from him. What I think he has always had is a lack of judgment in wheel-to-wheel combat, and it's showing up more and more as he gets older. He's still got the speed. I mean, some of his quali laps are outstanding. Are just lightning fast. So I think he's got the pace. You wouldn't write him off. And you wouldn't change him in a hurry for an unknown, but he's clearly his best is behind him, isn't it?
Yeah, and he has been rattled by this sensational youngster Leclerc.
Yeah, because they come along and it's so easy for them. They've got the pace. They make a few mistakes, but yes. Seb's I like Seb a lot. A big motorbike man as well, and Carmen he keeps it all very quiet, but he's got a fantastic collection of classic motorbikes.
You get the feeling he's the one that I'd want to go and have dinner with, because he seems like a properly rounded human being that has a sort of curiosity about life outside of Formula One.
He's an adult. He won't be playing PlayStation all night long. He'd actually sit and talk to you.
Yeah.
Now, do you know what? They're all great guys. They're almost all of them. You would be very happy to go out to dinner with. They've got a story to tell, and they're characters. So I don't like criticising any Formula 1 driver, because I know how hard it is to get there, and I know it's much harder still to stay there, and let alone go on to take championships and victories and all that. I will not write them off.
I think that's really important. And as someone, you won't remember, many years ago, a friend of yours called Paul, who had a old Jaguar Formula 1 car, he wanted to do a Formula 1 racing experience, and he stuck it on some Avon slicks, and I came to Silverstone to drive it. And you were there. Yeah. You drove it for a couple of laps and handed it to me. I'd never sat in. It was 0 degrees. And I spun the thing twice. And at that moment, I realised that anyone that can drive a Formula 1 car without crashing it is a hero, frankly. And to do it wheel to wheel with 25 other lunatics around you with such reduced visibility, I'm in awe of them. So even the guys at the back, I'll never laugh at them. If someone points at some at the back and goes, "They're a load of rubbish," I just say, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, try Monaco on a wet day, or back in the day when Monza on a wet day, when you're listening to the car in front, you can't see anything, you can't see your own dashboard, and you're literally your peripheral vision goes into hyper mode, and you start imagining reference points you think about where the braking marker boards might be or whatever, and then as you lift off the throttle, all the spray dies down, doesn't it, as the speed dies down. And it's like somebody's switching the lights on. And it's like, then you realise you're 200 metres too early for the corner, and off you all go again. But you literally can't see it. And when you know whether you're a racing driver or not, is if you press the throttle a bit harder in those moments, you're still a racing driver. If you lift, you're not a racing driver anymore.
Martin, that's fascinating chat. I hope everyone's enjoyed that. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting you over the years. I hope you continue doing the F1 commentary. Also, can you do another Martin Brundle supercar video? Remember that?
Yeah, but come on. How would I compete with you guys?
We need to get you on the show. Can I get you to come on the show and do a lap round the track? Come on, we go. Okay,
yeah,
I'm going to get that in motion.
Old Clarkson would never have me on the place.
Would he not?
No.
He's gone now. He's got a new show. We'll get you on there. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a very Merry Christmas. And just to let you know, there's going to be a few things changing on Collecting Cars next year. Some people coming onto the team, and I think the site is growing, and the success of it is surprising both myself and Edward. So have a lovely break, and we will see you in the new year. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.